This video is a response to somebody asking why they make 3 times the federal minimum wage and they can't afford a house. And whenever a conversation starts with the minimum wage, I'm always incredibly skeptical. And the reason for that is because virtually nobody actually makes the minimum wage. This is the first thing that, for me, it's one of the first things that pops into my mind is there's nobody making the minimum wage. It's like 1.3% of the population makes the minimum wage. And even if they're making the minimum wage, most of those people are tipped. And then when you break down the demographics of who's actually earning the minimum wage, we're talking about very young people who are kind of just starting out, or we're talking about tipped workers who are very happy with the minimum wage that they're making because they're making far more than that per hour and they're choosing to stay in that industry. But let's take a listen to this gentleman because, like I said, when you talk about minimum wage, you should always be skeptical when somebody's using that as kind of an economic measure. And this person in particular is being particularly misleading. So let's take a look.
Because federal minimum wage needs to be $52 per hour, and here's the fucking math behind it. Back when federal minimum wage was...
So let's just start with the absolute idiocy of thinking that the minimum wage should be over $100,000 a year, which is what $52 an hour would come out to, and how inflationary it would be for every single person in the country to be making over $100,000 a year. It would be insanity. Everybody knows it. Everybody with 2 brain cells to rub together knows you can't have a minimum wage of $52 an hour. It's just an incredibly stupid thing. But here's the crazy logic he uses to get there.
Was first established, the average cost of a home was between $4,000 and $6,000. And if you put the cost of the...
So when I say be skeptical of people talking minimum wage, I want you to pay attention. He told you when the minimum wage was established what housing prices were, but he didn't tell you what the minimum wage was. The minimum wage when it was established was 25 cents an hour, which was $520 a year. The average home cost $4,000 to $6,000 a year, which means when the minimum wage was established, it was not enough for you to buy a home with. It was never intended to be a wage that would let you go out and buy a house.
Home into an inflation calculator today, that home is only worth a maximum of $90,000. Now, if you want to own a home on federal minimum wage at $90,000, you need an $18,000 payment on a good interest rate for 30 years. And look what you need to earn per year in order to afford that same fucking house when federal minimum wage was established.
Okay, so you see what he's doing here? What he's essentially doing is misleading you into thinking that when the minimum wage was established, you could buy a house with it, and now you can't. That's why he doesn't tell you what the minimum wage was when it's established. He's leaving that piece of information out to allow you to draw this conclusion that the federal minimum wage was established so that people could buy a home. That's garbage. It's a complete lie. But here's something else. If you look at the history of the FHA mortgage, when the FHA mortgage came out, you could, before the FHA mortgage came out, you could not get a 30-year low interest rate loan. That wasn't a thing back then. You would have a 2 to 3 year, maybe 4-year amortization period where it was pure interest, right? So you're not paying down the loan, where the loan was essentially a balloon at the end, and you would refinance your home every few years. That's how lending worked. Banks didn't take out these long 30-year loans. And he points out a 3.25% interest rate, which is historically vastly below market rates. We've all gotten spoiled or used to this incredibly cheap money that you could borrow at 2, 3, 4%. That's not the historical reality. So he's taking a bunch of things here that are just essentially not based in reality and using it to draw this weird conclusion. But let's keep listening.
Look at that. Federal minimum wage actually pays you more than what you would need to buy a house if we hadn't fucked the housing market by letting hedge funds buy everything.
Okay, so that's interesting because we didn't screw the market by letting hedge funds buy everything. And let me start by saying I don't like that hedge funds are buying up a bunch of houses. I don't like it. I don't like that housing is being used by BlackRock and Vanguard as investment vehicles. But we didn't screw the housing market by letting them buy it. We screwed the housing market and therefore they bought it. All right. So the cause and effect here is backwards. Once we screwed the housing market, and we did this by making it too easy to buy a home. One of the things he doesn't talk about in here also is that when the minimum wage was before the FHA, back when the minimum wage was first kind of put out there, home ownership rates were 40%. We're now at 65. More people own homes now than they did then. But we made it so easy. We all know this from 2008. Those of us who were there, those of us who lived through it. I was actually in the mortgage industry at the time. We made it too easy to buy homes. Too many people who were vastly underqualified to buy houses got into the market. The banks were absolutely heavily to blame for this, but so was government intervention into the marketplace with all these guaranteed loans. And so what happened was you had the housing bubble of 2008. And I've done a prior video showing that construction after that economic crisis absolutely collapsed. We weren't building rental properties or homes. And it took us 3 or 4 years just to get back to where we were building before the '08 crisis, let alone increasing that production of housing as the population grew. So right now we have a genuine shortage of real estate, of properties available. And when you have a shortage, that's an investment opportunity. Everybody saw the market crash. People who were looking forward saw cheap homes on the market and a lack of building taking place. And so they snatched up a bunch of homes. That's what happens. That's what an investment is. I don't like it that this happened, but that's why this is going on. But we screwed up the housing market. Therefore, these investment firms were able to buy housing, not the other way around. We didn't screw it by them buying. We screwed it so they could buy. So anyway, let's go on.
And because this fucked ass country decided to prioritize the comfort of the billionaire class over the comfort of ourselves, establishing things like shelter, food, and medicine being human rights.
So then we get into the whole communist deal of I have a right to food, housing, healthcare, i.e. society has to provide these things to me because I have a right to it, which is a positive right, which requires work from another party to provide you to fulfill this right that you have, which is a horrible ideology, but this is what they believe. And so he dovetails into that, and he uses a bunch of misleading half-truths on the front end to justify this ridiculous communist kind of idea on the back end.
And the billionaire class not having the right to exist, they were able to play the Monopoly game, buy up every property on the board, and start charging fucking hotel prices while we're still getting paid starting fucking wages.
By the way, just for the purpose of let's just take a look at this. Just for the purpose of making sure that remember what he showed us. He showed us a loan at 3.25% with 20% down. He's got a loan amount here of $400,000. So if you buy a $400,000 house, but he's not taking 20% down, right, to make the loan $320,000, and he's also got an interest rate here of 8%. He's misleading you. He's doing it on purpose. He knows what he's doing. He's being intentional here. So he's pointing at the number here, but he's not running a comparable. So I'm buying a $400,000 house, which is somewhere near the average price of a home. And if you don't live in one of the most expensive areas in the country to live in, the average price of a home is actually below that. But he's not going to talk about that. So he's taking a $400,000 loan amount at 8% and pointing at that number. So he's not using comparable numbers to even the $80,000 misleading number that he put out there initially.
Prices while we're still getting paid starting fucking wages.
And what starting wages, I don't even know what he's talking about. Again, we've already covered the fact that less than 2%, like something like 1.3% of the population makes the minimum wage. Average salary in the United States right now, I think, is like 50-some thousand dollars. I don't know. I don't have the numbers in front of me. But we're definitely, the average income in the United States is not starting wages. The average income in the United States is not minimum wage. It's not $12 an hour. It's not $15 an hour. It's significantly higher than that. So that's a misleading thing to say. But it reaches out to people who are in that position. He's trying to manipulate young people who are just starting out.
So now to afford that same fucking home because a bank was able to sell it to a hedge fund who was able to sell it back to you for profit, now...
That's right. You need a household income of approximately $100,000 a year to buy a $400,000 house. And I would tell you this, that's not enough money. You shouldn't be buying a $400,000 house if you make $100,000 a year. But that's a whole nother issue.
You need to make $52 fucking dollars an hour.
So bear this in mind. What he's saying is, at a minimum, everybody in the United States, as a minimum wage, should be making $100,000 a year so they can buy a $400,000 house. And I don't care how much of a leftist you are, you have to acknowledge that that is just kind of a ridiculous way of looking at the world from an economic perspective.